It's not every day that we get to sit down with a Nobel Prize winner. Today, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Bob Lefkowitz, who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. He's described as the happiest laureate. Dr. Lefkowitz is also the author of a new book, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Stockholm. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us.
It is my pleasure indeed to be with you.
Now, may I say, you clean up real nice in that white tie and tails.
Thank you very much. I've not looked like that all that much during the pandemic, but I like the photograph.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And I love the take. There you are. I love the take on A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. We're going to talk about your book, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Stockholm, in just a little bit. But first, I want you to edify all of us on what earned you the coveted gold medal.
Well, drugs and hormones, we now know, work through specific sites on cells called receptors. They fit into them much like a key fits into a lock. There has to be an exact equivalence or a complementarity in their structure. So in a sense, a drug like adrenaline has a certain shape, and it fits into a site on a cell, like on a heart cell, which has an exact complementarity. Picture it as the lock. And so the adrenaline fits in and then it turns. And then something happens. Your heart beats stronger and faster. The same is true for virtually all hormones and drugs, histamine, serotonin, dopamine, all these things you've heard about over the years. I discovered the fact that there were these receptors. Prior to my work, which began, believe it or not, almost 50 years ago, nobody had any idea how drugs and hormones work. And so I spent my career proving that there was such a thing as these locks, which we now call receptors, figuring out what they looked like and how they worked. And the consequence of that is today, about a third of all drugs approved by the FDA are drugs which work on a huge family of receptors, which I discovered. These receptors, as I said, include the receptors for adrenaline, serotonin, dopamine, but also receptors through which we smell, taste, and see. So virtually everything about the way we perceive our environment is mediated by these receptors that we discovered.
That's incredible. And all these things that I think we can agree that we take for granted every single day, you had a hand in discovering this. Looking back on that history of yours, what kind of satisfaction must that give you to know that you played such an enormous role in all of this?
It's an extraordinary sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. All the more so in that I never set out to be a scientist. I wanted to be a practicing physician, and I was driven throughout my childhood and education to be a practicing physician, through which activity I think I would have been greatly fulfilled, but I could have only touched the lives in a lifetime of practice of perhaps a few thousand patients. But because of the research, I've been able to touch the lives of millions or tens of millions, not something I ever envisaged starting out. So yes, it's fulfilling beyond anything I can tell you.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about this book. We're going to do that after the break, so don't go anywhere. And we're back with Dr. Bob Lefkowitz, who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his work, his years, decades amassed in the work of understanding how the stimulation of specific receptors and adrenaline work together, something that we use in our everyday lives, as you were mentioning, histamines and so forth. And so through this process, through the decades of work that you put in, that you poured in, starting at Columbia, then working at the National Institutes of Health and Harvard before joining the faculty at Duke University, where you've been ever since, this whole path, this journey has taken you to win the Nobel Prize. And you've written a book about it. And I'd love for you to tell our viewers what this book entailed in the process, but also what people can take away from it once they read the pages.
Okay, I'm holding a copy of the book up just in case. And it's called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Stockholm. It's a book, in a sense, it's a biography, an autobiography, but it's really much more than that. It's a collection of stories. Anybody who knows me knows that I love stories. I love telling stories. I love hearing stories. And I've trained something like 250 scientists in my laboratory during my career. And I'm always regaling them with stories. And as long as I can remember, people are always saying to me, Bob, you have to write these stories down. I don't think that I ever would if it wasn't for the efforts of a former postdoctoral fellow of mine named Dr. Randy Hall, who is my co-author. We were sort of patterning it after a very well-known book of the same genre, which is sort of As Told To, by the famous Nobel Prize winning physicist Richard Feynman. Had written a book in this way. And so we started the work, and that's how it came to be. The title plays off the fact that many of my stories are humorous, often with an ironic twist. And in the book, I talk about the fact that my whole approach to life involves trying to see humorous things in everyday experiences. This is really, in a sense, akin to trying to sort of see behind the data when you do research and pull out possible hidden meanings. So to me, there's a real relationship between humor and scientific discovery. And I talk a lot about that in the book, and I try to illustrate it with some of my humorous and quirky stories.
I think a lot of people would be surprised at that because they think of humor and science as two very disparate images.
Yes.
And you being lauded for your personality and for your work, and also being coined the happiest laureate, I think people are in for a treat when they read your book. And from what it sounds like, it's not for scientists, really. It's for the rest of us.
Absolutely correct. And I think that one of the several reasons I wrote the book was to try to humanize scientists and try to show people, lay people, that, we may not be as dry kind of characters as they think we are.
Absolutely. And not only are you a scientist, but a physician as well. We haven't really touched on the fact that you are a cardiologist.
That is correct. And
also a cardiac patient.
And also a cardiac patient. Both of my parents had premature coronary artery disease. My father died at age 63, and I was diagnosed with angina at age 50 and had quadruple bypass surgery. But being a cardiologist and knowing what was going on, I have used all sorts of lifestyle modifications and medications to prolong my life. I'm now 27 years post bypass surgery, and I talk a lot about that in the book, and I give tips to people who may be interested in how I've managed to do so well.
Well, congratulations on that. And we're so happy to have you here. I have one last question for you, Dr. Lefkowitz, and that would be, how do you encourage kids, parents, learning institutions to better engage their students in the areas of science?
I think that's a wonderful question. I think what they need are inspirational role models. Hopefully, people like myself. I've been encouraging students to read my book. I lecture and chat with student groups. I've done several high schools and a variety of middle schools since the publication of the book. Students relate best to concrete role models. That's why I went into medicine in the first place. My role model was my family physician who made house calls in the Bronx. And I knew from the age of 7 or 8 years old, I wanted to be just like that doctor, Dr. Feibush. And that's what I set out to be. Now, of course, I had no way of knowing that the story would evolve and I would turn out to be not just a physician, but a scientist. But he was my initial role model.
That's fantastic. Well, and your role model to the rest of us. Congratulations again on this book. Wonderful thing. I cannot wait to read it. And we so appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today, Doctor.
My pleasure. It's been my pleasure, and I've enjoyed speaking with you.
It's been a delight. We're back in 2 minutes.